Well, thank you for that introduction. I stand here alone without Fiona, my dear colleague. She's had a tragedy well, not a tragedy, her mother did pass just not so long ago. So I'm here for her, I'm here for the students that we're going to talk about, and also for the educators who Fiona and I work with and work for. So a couple of things. I promise that I'm not going to use the word woke, because you will see in our paper that we do have a few movements that should concern us all, but I'm not going to use the word woke in this particular case.
Sorry, could you speak closer to the mic? I know it's annoying. But
oh, is that better? Better? Okay, all right. All right, I'm used to the little lapels, but anyway. Also, I have just come back from the US. I've been in the US for 6 years, so some of the things that you've all been talking about is actually quite disturbing for me, having been through 6 years in the States, and I don't need to elucidate on what I might have had to live through. I was living in the South, so that was a pretty torrid time. I have to say that education, I'd worked in the education system there. There are things about the American system that I really pay tribute to, but there are things that very, very much concern me, and I think it was the lady that was second, what's her name, Karina? When you spoke about English being vacuous here. I lived in dread when I used to hear about the governor of Florida taking charge of literature, telling the universities what sort of curriculum they had to have, and also in some states like Alabama where they were taking the Negro word out of one of my favourite books, To Kill a Mockingbird. So guys, I've lived through it, I've seen it. You never know in the morning when you wake up whether a school was going to be shattered because some gunman had gone in and actually killed students and teachers. It was awful, particularly during COVID period. Anyway, having said that, Fiona and I feel that there are a number of things that are happening in Australia that concerns us. There's some great things that are happening, but and this will also resonate with what a number of you have said this morning. Fiona and I really want to reflect today about the diminishing role played by traditional methods of teaching and learning, designed to cement knowledge and understanding and to refine thinking and communication skills. We've spoken and written elsewhere in recent years about the influence of the globalist movement on Australian education, dominated by those who claim that a fourth industrial revolution approach is needed to prepare students for the challenge of this century. Curriculum development in school education is dominated by those who believe that skills, disposition and attributes should take priority. We now see a real tension between the traditional commitment to knowledge acquisition, even though rigorous research and consideration of the evidence supports a particular theory or claim, and a 21st century learning agenda that prioritises nebulous and less quantifiable concepts such as the 4 Cs that has been around for about 20 years, 2 decades. And the 4 Cs happen to be communication, collaboration, creativity and critical thinking. And most of you will be saying, well, what's new there? As much as the 21st century educationalists, and in actual fact, what does this actually mean? Fiona and I would like to know, would have us believe such concepts are not new to education. They are no more a product or necessity of 21st century learning than they were in any previous era. So for many of us, this represents yet another attempt to replace the tried and true with the experimental and the unproven. And I think our previous speakers have already alluded to that. An obvious and disastrous consequence of this is the slide in Australian students' command of the English language, specifically in reading and specifically in writing, which Fiona and I have written about. The statistics say that 1 in 5 school leavers now is unable to meet national minimum standards. Well, since then, NAPLAN has abandoned the minimum standards. Parents, employers, tertiary institutions and government reviews, and I'm referring here to the Productivity Commission report, all identify long-term decline. The proportion of students performing at the highest levels is shrinking, and of course, the tail of the underachievers is growing. Despite the excitement around what we call globalist millennial goals for education, including our own Alice Springs Declaration of National Goals for Australian Schooling, too few students thrive academically and too few are less articulate in their national language, which is English, than their peers in other places, let's say multilingual Singapore. Fiona and I, when I was working with ACARA, we did some comparative studies between Finland and Australia, Singapore and Australia, and BC and Australia. And I could talk about that for a whole day if you wanted to listen to me, but it was very enlightening, very revealing. On this occasion, Fiona and I have decided that we have chosen debating as a lens to explore the nature and purpose of Australian school education in the context of multiple, well-publicised problems and disappointments and the dominance of the so-called 21st century learning agenda. Now, in the spirit of free and civil debate, please ask questions at the end and I will try to do the best I can. We have concluded that the place occupied by debate in Australian education broadly and in the national curriculum in particular is so minor that it's a case of blink and you're going to miss it. In today's presentation, we are looking at debating as a lost art because we see debating as a solution, possibly a retrieval as a means of, one, addressing educational goals more broadly, and two, the decline of students' English language proficiency in particular. The Australian curriculum aspires to developing active, informed citizenship founded on the idea that, and this comes out of the national goals, the Melbourne Declaration, the Hobart Declaration, now we have the Alice Springs Declaration. Education plays a critical role in shaping the lives of young Australians and contributing to a democratic, equitable and just society that is prosperous, cohesive and culturally diverse. Australians can lay claim to being one of the first genuine liberal democracies in the modern world. We have a vibrant, we have a plural civil society. And in March 2017, I wasn't here at the time, but I remember listening to the Australian Prime Minister then, who was Malcolm Turnbull, and he argued that Australia had the most successful multicultural society in the world. Turnbull praised the robustness, the adaptability, the functionality and the resilience of Australia's democratic institutions. He suggested that such institutions allowed Australia to offer a superior model of good governance for its citizens and to create a diverse yet cohesive society. Now, since some 5 years later, the Lowry Institute poll reports that the standing of democracy amongst Australians and the brand of Australian democracy has dramatically improved. For instance, 73% continue to see democracy as preferred to any other government, and the result in the 2022 poll was particularly high, so that hasn't changed. 19% claim that, in some circumstances, a non-democratic government would be preferable. Now, a greater proportion of the young people now see democracy as preferable. This has arisen in the last 5 years. This should be good news for Australia. And I ask a question here, and you might consider it, don't need the answer now. Is it that a younger age group may be more appreciative of an Australian democracy where its citizens resolve different views and conflicts by peaceful means and not by guns and protests? Where its citizens respect human dignity and have freedom to act, to speak, to think freely, that's if it does not stop others doing the same, and where elected representatives are held accountable? The post-pandemic social political context in which we Australians find ourselves, and I'm just going to mention a few, the voice, national security, health, education, artificial intelligence, we need to be wary of that, etc., should stimulate rational national debate as never before. But are we seeing it? I believe, and Fiona believes, that a vibrant national debate on matters of national interest is indicative of a healthy democracy. Now, the art of debate has its origins in ancient times, evolving and prized over centuries to become an intrinsic part of the culture of free nations and free people. The writings and teaching of the Greek giants, and we've heard some of them mentioned this morning, Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, encouraged the pursuit of intellectual conversations, arguably debates, about the greatest questions to which human beings can turn their minds to. Their legacy, along with others such as instructional reformer John Dewey, have planted debate as a fundamental human and universal practice. I just want to talk a little bit about Socrates at the moment, and some of you might have heard of the Socrates method, which actually a lot of American universities and high schools are using in the States at the moment. Socrates' feelings inspired reasoning to expose truths about life, the overarching question being, how should one live? He challenged participants to interrogate what they do know, all the while mindful that what they know might not be the truth. Socrates established an ethical system based on human reasoning. He led discussions on virtues such as wisdom, justice, courage, acts of piety and charity as a way of creating knowledge. His students interrogated their own beliefs. They paused to learn from their ignorance, confusion or error, instead of regurgitating ideas based on individual interpretations. Socrates encouraged his students to think for themselves, to question their thinking and to not expect quick and simplistic answers. Most of us will be familiar with formal competitive debating as perhaps the best known manifestation of oral argument. 3 people to a side, government opposition, time limits for each speaker, adjudication by moderators.
Sorry, can you put the microphone that way, like it's more horizontal?
That way?
Yes.
As I said, I'm not used to this. Sorry, thank you for speaking up though. Today's debates, of course, assume various forms in society, including government debates, court proceedings, debates in the media, and in daily life where citizens argue an alternative view through social interaction. And of course, technology has contributed to that. But we would like to say here that, as in ancient times, our students need to be discerning and critical thinkers, capable of ascertaining truth and contributing to a free and civil society. We argue that debating has the capability of equipping students with the requisite skills to navigate a 21st century world. And let me just spare 2 minutes here to talk about teachers that I know who have taught debating and what they have found useful in their classrooms. Any teacher who is actively engaged in debating or used it as an in-class activity will agree that it is a great strategy for language learning, since it engages students in a variety of cognitive and linguistic ways. Most importantly, it provides meaningful listening, speaking and writing practice. Who knows, we need our students to be able to do those things. It is also effective in helping our students develop argumentation skills for persuasive speech and writing. Sounds like nap time. Debating is an excellent in-class teaching strategy to enhance students' critical thinking, a so-called 21st century skill. Yet for centuries, debating has served to enhance an individual's ability to structure, to organise thoughts, and to develop analytical, research and note-taking skills. And in this way, students have for centuries learned to form a balanced, informed argument and use reading and use evidence. But debating also helps students to examine issues critically by detecting any gaps or any errors in an opponent's counter-arguments. In my experience, this type of critical thinking is rarely done well in schools. Although research and practice show debating to be effective in differing formats for educational purpose, debating is getting minimal attention these days. Many, including teachers, dismiss it as last millennium. Teachers are likely to question their own knowledge and skills in this area, given the demonstrable decline in English language and competence, as well as the lack of emphasis on debate in teacher education programs that I've been there and in the curriculum. The pressure on teachers and schools to fit so many academic and non-academic activities into the school day makes it reasonable to wonder where the time would come to teach debating. More than ever, debating should be a key aspect of our students' learning as they try to understand our nation's evolution and how they can contribute to Australia's future. It is important to know how we got where we are in the West, because brave and determined and smart people that we've heard about this morning would not be silent when they had something important to say. And they used town hall sessions, parliaments, wayside encounters, thinking here of Edmund Barton, Henry Parkes, on their public tours before Federation, and the constant appeals to reason in various forms of our human endeavour, scientific, medical, industrial, economic, etc. That is our history, and a free and civil society cannot afford to forget it. Ostensibly, Fiona and I are curious about the extent to which the broader concept and application of the principles debating can contribute to the school curriculum. and develop active and informed citizens that the Alice Springs Declaration talks about. That is there or should there be a common pedagogical approach rather than relegating debating to the extracurricular stage that it has now, a special interest or a hobby undertaken outside school? There is no way of quantifying any systemic commitment to debating due to its lack of justification and very minor presence in the Australian curriculum. No data is available from education authorities and is a complete absence of debating in teacher education. According to the Australian Debating Federation, about 30,000 students participate in debating competitions every year. These students, as well as their coaches and their other supporters, operate outside the curriculum. I was a debating coach, I spent hours doing that. The ADF says debating training imparts lifelong skills in students, including confidence in speaking in public to peers, an ability to logically make and assess arguments, and a willingness to engage with and learn from those with different opinions. Based on our professional experience, we conclude that debating is widely seen as elitist in Australia and other countries, a nice to have extracurricular activity, but lacking overt philosophical, academic and intellectual commitment from decision makers. Whether scheduled or spontaneous, formal or informal, long or short, debating or around the dinner table, and some people were talking today about family and how communication is important there, debating is not a uniquely 21st century capability. Rather, it's a long-standing proven strategy for developing intellectual and linguistic skills. It demands increasingly sophisticated mastery of the English language, which is the gateway to the wider curriculum. So we might ask, well, how can these students, the growing tail end of our national testing, is ever going to be able to do debating? Develops a sense of individual responsibility for life as active and informed members of the community. Does the national curriculum, including its jurisdictional variants, and what I'm saying here is that the Australian curriculum is the umbrella. Every state and territory has its own curated curriculum that they use with their teachers and students. So I'll ask the question again, does the national curriculum assist students to develop an interest in debating, encouraging the interests, the confidence and skills that will enhance Australian society and governance? The vital place of debate is reflected in parliamentary guides, and I'm quoting from Odge's Australian Senate practice. In chapter 10 he writes, "Debate fulfils one of the primary functions of the Senate, that of informing itself and the public by deliberation before decisions are made. A senator may not read a speech. The rationale of the prohibition on the reading of speeches is that reading speeches destroys real debate, which is intended to be an exchange of views and arguments, and that if speeches are read, there is greater danger of abuse of proceedings by senators delivering speeches written by others." I wonder why. In the federal lower house, debate is guided by the House of Representatives, and I'm not going to read you all of this, but I'm going to just take out a few snippets here. This chapter is called Conduct and Control of Debate. The term debate is a technical one, meaning the argument for and against a question. In practice, the proceedings between a member moving a motion and the ascertainment by the chair of the decision of the House constitute a debate. A decision may be reached without debate. In addition, many speeches by members which are part of the normal routine of the House are excluded from the definition of debate because there is no motion before the House. These include the asking and answering of questions, ministerial statements, matters of public importance. Then further down, I found this part really quite interesting and had to smile. It is in the clash of speech upon speech that national aspirations and public opinion influence these aims, reinforce or counteract their strength. And finally, the effectiveness of the debating process in Parliament has been seen as very much dependent on the principle of freedom of speech. So logically, if debate, with all its specified constitutional implications for freedom of speech and assembly, is such a critical feature of Australian governance, then it should be a key feature of the formation of active and informed citizens. So the 4 C's that I was talking about earlier have dominated education in recent decades, and this is part of a highly persuasive movement that argues that there are priorities for students to manage life and work in what is called a VUCA environment. The V stands for volatile, the U stands for uncertain, the C stands for complex, and the A stands for ambiguous. And the thing about this is that this particular world is oriented around technology, where knowledge is accessed and knowledge is created online. The 4 C's agenda also negates the need for rote learning. They also devalue the concept of rigorous acquisition of knowledge. And a consequence of the reduced emphasis on and respect for knowledge is that the knowledge voids are filled with recourse to emotion. And here I resonate with the Archbishop, who was talking about feelings are replacing reason. So, for instance, debate requires the speaker to convince an audience by exposing a weak case, a lack of substance and logic, and perhaps even factual errors. There's no room for opinion, there's no room for feeling, only sound reasoning. And given the constant references to the science during the pandemic, one would expect that the art of debating should now be well and truly centre stage. So let me now talk about the Australian curriculum and the very little reference that the Australian curriculum has when it comes to debate or debating. So Fiona and I did the search on debate and debating. There was over 70 references. Only 5 of these were located in the content descriptions. So for those of you that don't know how the Australian curriculum is set up and organised, content descriptions are the knowledge. They are mandatory. Teachers are meant to teach them. However, they're also called elaborations. Elaboration, not mandatory, optional, and teachers are not required to actually teach them. Well, guess where debating is?
I know where it is.
Yeah. Well, tell me.
It's in the elaboration.
That's right. It is in the elaborations, except for 5. Okay, so I'm going to just read you some examples. Auslan has been approved as a curriculum, and they have content descriptions in year 7 and 8, and they're about socialising and informing. But for socialising, the elaboration reads, use interactions to support discussion and debate and to demonstrate culturally appropriate behaviours in and beyond the classroom. The key concepts here are protocol, debate is number 2, role, feedback, and the key processes are debating, clarifying, eliciting. Find that incredible, but that's probably one of the best statements that we found in the whole curriculum. English, you would think there are lots of references to debate and debating. Well, you think you would, but guess what? There's only about 9. They're all in the elaborations. There is one that runs from year 6 right through to year 10, and it's the same reference. I'll explain later. So this is then, and the reference is participation in pair, group, class, school and community speaking and listening situations, including informal conversations, discussions, debates and presentations. And that runs right through to year 10. Remember, I'm only talking about F to 10 at the moment. However, when we get to year 8, we start to look at analysis. And it's still an elaboration. Analysing arguments for and against a particular issue in current community debates and justifying a personal stance. We get to year 9, it is still an analysis, but now we're going to look at possible reasons for how the media is projecting certain issues, and the example given in the curriculum is whaling in Japan. Another one, when you get to year 10, there are 2 others in addition to the common one that I spoke to you about. Determining through debate whether a text possesses universal qualities and remains relevant, and that sits in what's called the literature strand. The next one, identifying and analysing ethical positions on a current issue debated in blogs or online discussion forums, including values or principles involved and the strengths and weaknesses of the position in the context of the issue. The other one I want to refer to is science. Science has 2 references. One of them sits in the aims and the rationale. It reads, an ability to communicate scientific understanding and findings in a range of audiences to justify ideas on the basis of evidence and to evaluate and debate scientific arguments. Pretty good, I thought, when they were putting that one together. In year 10, there's an elaboration, and it is constructing evidence-based arguments and engaging in debates about scientific issues. So, as a summary here, there are frequent references to debating as a skill applicable in what is called the general capabilities. The general capabilities, oh my goodness, don't get me started. But the general capabilities, you know, you've got the curriculum here, then you've got the general capabilities there, and then I think I still have the cross-curriculum perspective. Yeah, right, yeah, you got it, yes, right. So what we're seeing here is that, and for those of you that don't know, I'll just read them, and they sound very much 21st century agenda. Creative and critical thinking, literacy and numeracy, why they're there, I don't know. Digital literacy, ethical understanding, intercultural understanding, and personal and social capability. So since I've left the country and come back, that list has grown. So capabilities, there are references to debate as a skill applicable in the general capabilities and also the cross-curriculum priorities. But as I explained before, or as you would have worked out, you're a bright group, there are explanations, definitions and descriptions of what debating can look like. There is no reference there to how a teacher might be able to use it. There are no lesson plans or sample lessons to give teachers an idea. If you go to the Singaporean curriculum, they have absolutely incredible, what I call detailed descriptions on how teachers can use certain elements of the curriculum. So if it was knowledge and then debate was an example, they would then give you a way of going around that. In Australia, the Australian curriculum was written without having any instructional pedagogy for teachers. That was deliberate. Okay, there are 15 references to, we've talked about that, sorry, we won't go on about that. Civics and citizenship. So it sits in HASS, which is Humanities and Social Studies, I believe. Now, civics and citizenship,
It's history and study of
yeah,
society.
studies of society. Oops, got that. See, been out of the country for too long. In civics and citizenship, which is tucked away in the learning area of humanities and social sciences, and it's for years 3 to 10, there are some vague references. I'll just read one or two here. And this is in the aims. Knowledge, understanding and appreciation of the values, principles, institutions and practices of Australia's system of democratic government and law and the role of the citizen in Australian government and society. And the other one here is skills involving questioning and research, analysis, evaluation, interpretation, civic participation and decision making and communication. Now, right at the end of that particular, I think that's the aim, sorry, yes. It says, students explore contemporary issues from approaches such as class discussion, debates, civil action, role play, volunteering, student participatory research, community service and advocacy. But no, as I said, there is no other description or no other advice given to teachers. Can I just interrupt myself in the paper at the moment by saying that one of the things that's badly done by teachers too, not just in Australia but everywhere I've been, how do you conduct a discussion? Oh my goodness, there is logos. Who mentioned the word logos? There is logos in how one conducts a discussion with a class. I won't go into that now, but you go across this Australian curriculum, discussions come up everywhere, role play comes up everywhere. Well, you know, depending on where you went to university to learn how to teach, you really don't know what you're doing with those particular strategies. And I move on because I'm conscious of the time. Any investigation of the place of debating in contemporary school education goes to the questions about, and Fiona and I are very strong about this, I'll say it again, any investigation of the place of debating in contemporary Australian school education goes to questions about the essential purposes of our country's curriculum and schooling. The second, and it really goes back to that number of papers that Fiona and I have written. We always go back to the purpose of education, in particular in Australia, because we tend to reinvent things in Australia, and we go back and we go back and we borrow and we buy. Reading through the latest version of the Australian curriculum, reviewed and published as version 9 in 2022, other themes such as globalism have raised their heads. These complex issues are identified for study under these themes of arguably make debating more relevant than they ever has been. Okay. So there has arguably never been as great a focus on critical thinking as a 21st century learning priority that gets such consistent attention from academics and policymakers that one might think no previous generations have ever considered important. One wonders how previous civilisations have managed to achieve anything. If only reading, writing and research got the attention that critical thinking does, but neither are shiny or new, these seem less able to compete with the 21st century agenda that prioritise critical thinking along with other more sexier soft skills and attributes like creativity, communication and collaboration, all of which, by the way, are promoted by international organisations such as the OECD, United Nations bodies and interest groups. The focus on critical thinking, creativity, communication and collaboration is intriguing, especially as we consider how they might be taught, assessed and applied. How many teachers today are grounded in those ancient practices I talked about earlier and we've heard about today that promoted and developed precisely these skills? So in conclusion, Fiona and I have worked on this together, so it's not just my point of view, it's collaborative. The Australian curriculum does acknowledge, to a very limited degree, the contribution that the ancient art of debating makes to the education of students in a free and civil society. We assert that a far more constructive approach would be to identify its value for English, the history, the sciences and the arts, and in particularly as well as for the key area of civics and citizenship, making sure to link the knowledge and skills to be developed across the curriculum and providing thorough advice to teachers. There cannot be any add-ons. When literacy was first, 20 years ago I suppose, was raised and it was talked about as literacy across curriculum, teachers put their arms up and they said, we're not doing it, we haven't got any time to do it. So this can't happen this time round. The question must be asked, if students are expected to practice debating in some subjects in classrooms, why not in all? Most importantly, how are they to be prepared for the senior secondary years and for post-school life and work when the 21st century skills of creativity, collaboration, critical thinking and communication become so important? Now, before I go to rounding up finally, I would like to say that there is a senior secondary studies curriculum that's been written at the moment by CARA. Some of it has already been approved and it's out in schools. Others are still being written and they're in draft form and will go out in schools eventually. But just to give you an example, if debating is going to feature in that secondary, and it does, I'm just going to give you a quick hint at that. If it's going to feature, what is going to happen in years particularly for F to 10 and 7 to 10 if debating is not taught. So English, biology, chemistry, physics, geography, modern history, Hindi, French, and that's it. They will definitely be incorporated in the new 11 and 12 syllabus. So in conclusion, in this paper, Fiona and I have argued that debating, understood to enhance thinking skills, or as someone said earlier, to think well, argumentation and literacy skills such as speaking, listening and writing should receive a stronger presence in the curriculum. And this is because, one, it's based on benefits afforded to students as our future citizen workers of Australia, and also to our Australian democracy as a healthy, thriving democracy. A reduction in content in the latest version of the Australian curriculum is timely for exploiting the interrelationship between debating, thinking, and other general capabilities, and equipping students with invaluable skills that have a really good chance of fulfilling the goals of the Alice Springs Declaration. That is, all young Australians deserve to be supported in becoming successful learners, confident and creative individuals, and active and informed citizens. Now, I'd like to leave you with something that was written by Kofi Annan when he was the Secretary General For those of you that know him, he was also the recipient of a Nobel Prize. And he writes, "No one is born a good citizen. No nation is born a democracy. Rather, both are processes that continue to evolve over a lifetime. Young people must be included from birth." Thank you.